All right, there we go. So welcome back. We took a week off, and so now we're here. 2 weeks ago, we discussed the two flood stories, and I felt bad because we were running low on time, and we had to wrap up that conversation a little bit quicker than I expected. And I just wanted to come back and see if you all had any like lingering thoughts about these two stories, or specifically the endings, or just any details in between that had kind of simmered a little bit, any extra thoughts or anything.
And I left you early, so
Okay.
I didn't hear. I do need to go back and do that.
Okay.
It's a little bit difficult to decide which one you want to accept. I mean, they both seem a bit, unreal from the standpoint that if you want to look at the current day practicalities of what they have to say, neither one of them really speaks to reality.
Right. So the beginning of Genesis is a lot of mythological origins. These stories have like a very mythological feeling of them. In today's chapters, we're going to get the last chunk of the mythological kind of stuff. After this, there is going to be a very big tonal shift where it kind of jumps out of the realm of like mythology as we think of it more like in a classic mythos sense. But the fact of the matter is, it's interesting seeing this is now our second round where we have like kind of two competing mythological stories, and they're similar, but they don't necessarily say the same thing. Okay, any other thoughts? All right. Or were you gonna say something?
Well, one of the interesting things in the other book we're supposed to look at, which I looked at this morning, is that he keeps talking about how people back then interpreted things, early interpreters, and that's I got so confused because I thought it was what it meant to them, and so it's just one more layer of, because this is supposed to be like prehistory or kind of stuff, and so I guess I don't know what's supposed to be important. And then he has all of those other books of the Bible that we don't have in our Bible, just in the Jubilee, and it's hard to make sense of all of that.
Okay.
Not much guidance, like what's important and what's not.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting thinking about the fact that these stories lived in an ecosystem, and we have like the artifact, but we don't have the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I think of it kind of like archaeology. One of my favorite things is when there's a thing and people don't know what it is, it's either a religious artifact or some kind of fertility cult thing. It always seems to be in those two categories. And it's kind of the archaeological shorthand of, we don't know what this is.
Yeah.
But kind of in that same way, there's pieces especially this part, where we're kind of like, I don't know what to do with this. This seems like you're missing something else. Like it almost feels like it's referencing something we don't have. Or like hearing a conversation, but only hearing one side of it. And I think that's kind of fair. We're going to get, that's very applicable, especially for our 2 chapters today. There's a lot here that I feel like isn't as meaningful to us, but you can tell it had meaning to other people. Great. So let's go ahead and jump in a little bit. So chapter 10, I know this is one of the sections where there's a lot of information and it's really easy to skim over it, just because a lot of names, locations.
Yeah.
But how I'm just curious, how closely did you all look into it? Was it just like, oh, this is just names and genealogy, and just kind of skimmed it? Or did you actually like go through and try to piece out what they're talking about?
And
Well,
then the middle is this little story of Babel, which I was saying, oh, this is just genealogy, and I went right by it.
Okay, so we
yeah.
have two chunks of genealogy. We'll get to them, but they're not the same. Once again,
Oh, yeah.
they're talking about different things. So this first chunk of genealogy, was there any names that jumped off the page as you like kind of skimmed over it? Because there's some
Oh.
kind of weird details plugged in here. Yeah, Mary Ellen.
One of the things that jumped out at me is, when they talked about which person and at what age he became the father, and it seemed like they were all in their 30s when he became the father of the mentioned person. And yet every one of them seems to end in years and had other sons and daughters. It was kind of a repetitive thing. And that's what I caught.
Okay.
The one name that popped out at me was Nimrod.
Mhm.
Because is that a hunter or a fisher? But a hunter, I think.
Mhm.
But and the thing that went through my mind is, where did they find all these names? I mean, who wrote down all of these names, and what sort of archive? I mean, nobody had a birth certificate, or there probably wasn't any central registry of birth. Where did they find all this? Is this something that just got passed down orally through generations, or when
Some of
did
the things are
somebody
weird.
write it down?
Yeah.
There's
So
also Sheba and Canaan is one of them. Egypt is one of the names.
Yeah, yeah.
So yes. So Sue, you found actually the clue to make chapter 10 make sense. We have a person named Cana. We have a
Yeah.
person named Egypt.
Yep.
We have a person named Cush. These are geological cities. This
Yes.
is a map preserved in the form of genealogy. What's going on here is they are naming the groups of people in the location, in the general direction that they are.
Okay.
So this is why this genealogy in 10 is different than the genealogy that comes after the Tower of Babel. Is this is an oral history that helps people memorize where cities are located and what groups of people you're going to find where. So
Oh,
that first group is kind of, okay, to explain one thing, I do have to explain the worldview of the people at the time is rotated 90 degrees. So we think of the world rotated on a north-south axis. Specifically, it's very clear with how they give directions in Hebrew that their worldview is turned on its side. So the Mediterranean Sea is at the top of their mental map, and the Arabian Peninsula is more at the bottom of their map. So Egypt is more to the side, and the rest of the Levant is on the other side. So you kind of have to rotate your mental map, if that helps at all. And so to the one side, they're talking about everyone that you're going to encounter. Oh, where's the line? The coast, or there's in verse 5, chapter 10, verse 5, you see these are the coastland people. And so it's like if you go towards the coast and you go up and around, you're going to hit the Egyptians, you're going to hit the Canaanites, you're going to hit all those groups of people over there. And so it's not that they have like a physical lay of the land as we think of like with a map, but if remember, this is originally from a nomadic society. So as you're wandering about, if you hit people that say, oh, we're Canaanites, all of a sudden you can log it into a slot in your brain and you know the direction you're going.
What about
versus,
Chaldeans? They talk about I don't know if it's in the Bible or in the other books, but that there are
yeah.
people, yeah.
So that's in the other direction. That is where Abraham's from. Abraham
that's related
is
to
from the
Iraq.
Chaldean people in the land of Ur, which is roughly where Iran is.
Iraq is, okay.
Mhm. So Chaldeans pop out in Michigan specifically because there is a large Christian Chaldean population here. I found that out once I moved here, because otherwise the Chaldeans meant very little to me. So the Chaldeans are one of the oldest Christian communities. So yeah, so you have Egypt in one direction, you have more of the Chaldeans in the other direction, which is more like Tigris and Euphrates area. And then you have there is another group of people, I believe it's the descendants of Shem, are all the Arabic population that's more in like the Arabian Peninsula. And so this is all a mental map making, because it sounds kind of silly to say that one of Ham's descendants is Egypt. Like, otherwise that doesn't make much sense. But Larry, you pointed out Nimrod.
Yeah.
Which,
yeah,
this is just a weird piece of trivia. When did Nimrod shift between being a mighty hunter and a warrior, and no one's like Nimrod? Nimrod is a compliment to Nimrod being an insult. Does anyone actually know where this comes from? Bugs Bunny. The Bugs Bunny cartoon just called someone a Nimrod, and it overnight became an insult because no one knew where Nimrod came from. So blame the bunny on that one, because Nimrod is actually supposed to be a compliment.
Okay. Elmer Fudd.
those are not Semitic, or are they Semitic? The Hebrew tribes the tribe, Israel tribe was what, they spoke Aramaic or Hebrew, whatever, it's not clear, and they are not considered Semitic, or are they?
So,
We say anti-Semite, so it must be. Okay.
right. This gets a little bit confusing. So at the point that we're about to go into with like Abraham, this is an oral history that's been passed down. So if you remember when we start, when we think the stories originate is very far away from when it got written down.
Okay.
What they find, actually, they've done brain studies, which is kind of really cool, that learning to read actually makes it really, really hard to memorize things verbatim. But what they find is if you don't know how to read, your memorization skills go through the roof. And so our ability to memorize is very not very strong. It's actually getting worse because of the internet for just fascinating reasons, that our brain prioritizes where to find information versus memorizing the information itself, which is just fascinating in brain studies. But basically, they think that the oral traditions are fairly reliable just because of the lack of reading actually increases that ability. So, but that said, Abraham is a long ways away from when it was written down. And when we talk about Babel, we're going to actually get to this kind of disparity, which is fascinating because we see this at play. So the people at the time aren't even speaking Hebrew, they're speaking Proto-Hebrew. So it's it's likely an even older version of it. It is a Semitic language. The people groups are little bit more fuzzy. There's still very much a distinction between like a more Arabic population, a more Persian population, because the Persians and the Arabs are not the same. And then you have the Egyptians over at the side. And then as you go up more, you get more into like Turkey, and then into the more like Greek and Italian. And so all of these groups are distinct and connected at the same time. You can see it in the way that letters evolve. So the Roman alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet, and the Arabic alphabet are all connected to some of these proto-languages. The one that stands out is the cuneiform, is just a thing unto itself, and that's the one that is like those little dit dots, which that one's just a thing unto itself, but that's from Babylon. So that's kind of that one over there. The script that becomes what we understand to be Hebrew actually comes out of the exile. So they aren't even writing in the Hebrew script that we understand if they knew how to write. So, but like I said, all these populations are a lot more blended than we think today. There's the linguist joke that the difference between a dialect and a language is that a language has an army. Meaning a nation state kind of almost creates the firm boundaries between languages, otherwise they're just dialects. But all the language here is just very squishy, just because everyone probably knows a few languages, but they're all likely taught, it's not like they're fully switching between one and another, but they can like kind of mesh them together. And so there's just, everything's really blurry of the distinctions between culture and language and region, especially because we're talking about nomadic people.
Okay,
So did that answer the question?
yeah, sort of,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. So we have this kind of genealogical map that's where I say it kind of means something to the people at the time, but since we don't need that map, we kind of just skim through it, right? Until we hit the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
So let's spend some time on this one. I absolutely love this story. It is the last of our mythology stories, but it is one of our shorter ones at the same time. What jumps out at you at this story with this reading? What's going on here? What's happening? So was there any details or nuggets? I mean, I feel like this story is kind of like known in broad strokes. Was there any details that you don't remember from just like cultural memory of this one? Yeah, Mary Ellen?
You know, of course, the story of the Tower of Babel is you know, part of all the Christian ed, you know, in my background, but I don't remember the part where the tower was to reach the heavens. I missed that before.
Me too.
In my mind, they thought that heaven was above them and they thought that they could touch it. And that's just completely out of the realm of how I see heaven. And, you know, just the fact that they felt that if they went tall enough, which, I mean, look up at the sky, how tall would that, it just seems so unrealistic to me that, you know, they thought they could do this.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's where did it go? So you get like this it's interesting hearing, because you kind of get a little like window into their thought process. Because first it's let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly, which is interesting that they're literally telling us how they built it. We're going to take bricks, and this isn't going to be stone. This is going to be masonry, basically. We're going to make the materials. We're going to bake them. And once they made them, they're like, let's build a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. So you have like idea one, we want to reach the heavens. Idea two, we want to make a name for ourselves. We want something to be remembered by. And then thing three is, otherwise we shall be scattered upon the whole face of the earth. They want to be together and protected. And so there's this impetus towards community. And I'm curious about these three things and how it actually, like, does this relate to us? Like hubris, let's build something big because we can. Let's build something grand because we want to. And we want to be remembered. Let's build something or make something of ourselves that's going to last beyond our lives. But then there's this other thought of we don't want to be scattered. We want protection. And these three things, like, do you see these at work in your life, in the lives of others, in our society? What do you think?
Certainly things are scattered around in our society. People are moving all the time.
Mhm.
But don't you always kind of want to go home and be with your family, the people you know, the community you were part of?
Right. But
It's-
at
it's a
this point, they're all
want.
nomadic. There's not a home. So they're in a way saying, let's make a home.
Yeah,
Like, let's actually settle down. Let's stop moving all about everywhere. Let's actually make a city.
They
mhm.
were sick of it.
There was one detail, this is kind of changing the subject a little, but that I don't remember, and that is that the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the sons of men had built. That's verse 5. But I don't remember that in the story. I mean, it was there, I guess, but I don't remember that he came down and he became sort of like a person. I mean, I imagine this as somebody you can see and touch and be there. And instead of just proclaiming from heaven what should be done.
Mhm.
Yeah, he does that every once in a while.
Yeah. Just
So
don't
this-
remember that.
So once again, pay attention to small details. So the Lord with the tiny caps is the
Yeah.
name of God. So Yahweh came and saw. And as we've seen in the other stories, the Yahweh stories have this more like bodily form that God goes places, God walks places, God arrives, God looks. It's much more anthropomorphic. And so it almost makes sense that, yeah, Yahweh came and saw. It's not just that omnipotent, ever-present God, but this God arrives and says, huh, look at this.
Okay, I have a question about Yahweh. Now, they didn't even speak the word because it was so holy, but then he walks around on earth. It doesn't make
Yeah.
sense.
Mhm.
I mean, I kind of like the idea of him walking around on earth. That's kind of neat, but the not speaking the word and not putting the vowels in, and
So that may be a later development.
okay. So-
There's an assumption that there was a way to say this. Just another reminder, Yahweh is a guess. We don't actually know.
Okay.
A lot of people wanted something to say those 4 letters, and so we put vowels that we thought made sense, just given some other linguistic cues. But what they think is that when Hebrew was originally written down, there was no vowels across the board. Actually, if you read like a modern day Israeli newspaper, you will see there's in common print, they don't put vowels. Hold on, I'll show you what I mean. Okay, little bit of a Hebrew language lesson. Try to get my big print Hebrew here. So let's see, can you see that more or less?
Yeah.
Okay, so the big letters that you see, those are only the consonants. If you see the little dots and slashes all around the letters, those are the vowels.
Oh,
So they didn't originally write this script with vowels in it. They just wrote the consonants, and you were just supposed to know what vowels went with what word. And it's really confusing because the way that you like conjugate verbs is you change the vowels. And so there's some confusion sometimes of what word is actually being said. What happened is there was that confusion. And so they went back and added vowel markings in it at a much later date. But the thing about it is, or so that's why there are dots and slashes all around, is because that is how they could add vowels without changing without expanding the word, if that makes sense. So we're used to spelling it out sequentially, where you kind of read it like this because you're like consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. And so you kind of ping pong across the word. So when the original name of God was written, there was no vowels across the board. By the time they added vowels, they're like, we probably shouldn't say the name of God. And there was that was during the push. Those of you who were in the Matthew study, we talked about the Pharisees building a fence around the Torah so you don't break the rule. And so you make a rule to make sure you don't get close to breaking the rule, and you make a rule to make it so you don't get close to breaking the rule that helps you not break the rule. And saying the name of God is one of those that they think that they originally did speak it, but it just slowly, to not take the Lord's name in vain, the rule kind of expanded until the point that you don't say it.
Okay.
So,
It's interesting. One of the things you frequently see on Facebook is something written with all the vowels left out. And, it often says, well, only 5% of people can read this, but, I guess we don't need vowels.
it's helpful. There are confusions, but yeah, we don't necessarily need vowels if you know the language well enough.
Right.
We need them for verbs.
Right. Anyway, so going back, so that's a little bit about the name of God. I know it comes up every now and again because it's very foreign for us not to be able to call God God or say Jesus. But the culture of it has changed a lot through the millennia, basically. But here, once again, we have the name of God, the Lord, arrives and kind of just looks around and makes a decision. It's kind of funny that God only shows up after they've already started building the tower. What's up, Mary Ellen?
Well, and he mentions it, I'm trying to find the spot, but he mentions we, like the Lord wasn't alone. And, come, let us go down and confuse their language here.
Maybe that's the royal we. The
It
royal we is me.
Well, I understand that use of it, but come, let us go down. Us.
Doesn't he have his angels or celestial beings?
This
I
is
didn't-
one that will always be a debate. Is it a royal sense of God having multiplicity always like a king? Is it God in the heavenly court, that there's just a court following God everywhere? Or, as the Christian tradition likes to say, is this God speaking to the Trinity that already exists? And so God is already in Trinitarian state, therefore there's a we. So those are the three standard interpretations. But yeah, once again, we have this we, this multipleness to God's essence somehow.
And if God is all knowing, why does he have to go down? I mean, he already knows what's. The only reason to go down is to do something, I would think.
Well,
And why? Why did he, why would he want to confuse their language and make it to the, and why did he scatter them abroad over the whole face of the earth? And they left off building the city. But, it's like they were doing something. I don't see the harm in what they were doing. But God does.
So that's why I brought up the three different reasons they give for building the tower. Is if you're building it to reach heaven, yeah, that's kind of arrogant. It's like, we have this goal, we want to do it because we can, which is something humans do all of the time. I mean, that's why we have skyscrapers today, is they wanted to see if they could, and so they did. But the other two seem much more relatable and almost understandable to, like, no one wants to be forgotten. Like, we want to be remembered. And I think, like, I don't think that's bad, but also we don't want to be scattered. We want to have a home. We want to feel protected. We want somewhere to feel safe. that is very understandable.
But God didn't understand it, apparently.
Right. So let's go through some, if you all are interested, we can walk through some interpretations, one which I am very partial to, another which is more like probably a historical understanding. The first thing, so I'm going to share my screen with you. Just knowing the region and knowing like a little bit of the context of when this is written, the tower they were likely envisioning, knowing it's also made of mud brick, was likely a ziggurat, which was common in Babylon. So this is made of mud brick. It has that like iconic pyramid, step pyramid-like shape. And these were some of the biggest buildings at the time, if you're not talking about the pyramids. So the pyramids, the pyramids are actually already really old by this point. They're already kind of like an archaeological site unto themselves. But the ziggurats were the big construction project in and around the area that the Levant is, where we think that Abraham is from the land of Ur. This is like the go-to big building. But what you see is it's a fortress. So there would be like different levels of the city. Some of these were temples, but this gives a level of security and protection, or at least the image of security and protection, because this is just a massive project to build. The thing is, not all of these always lasted, because the one famous one is the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And the Hanging Gardens, as you know, is a marvel of the world that doesn't exist. And I don't remember exactly when they think that it was destroyed. We have like record that this did exist. I would need to do a little bit of research if we think we know where it is, but like we don't really even have ruins that we talk about. But you see, like they were infamous for like the Hanging Gardens being just that. It's a garden, almost like the Garden of Eden. It's lush. It has this water in the middle of the desert. And so there's almost one line of logic wondering if the destruction of the Hanging Gardens or in some of these big architectural projects in Babylon were almost seen as like an affront to God. Because if your creation story is God created a garden, and then you see humans making these big buildings filled with gardens, you would think like these people are arrogant and trying to beat God. And it almost seems like you get your comeuppance if this gets destroyed. So that's one of the more like archaeological, sociological. Is this a nomadic group of people kind of thumbing their nose at a society? Which this is why I mentioned before, there's this tension between when the story is supposed to take place and when the story was written down. Because if the story is written down at around the time of more like the Hanging Gardens, it actually pushes the timeline very far into the future, because Babylon comes into prominence after the nation of Israel is already established. But they would have been taken there during their exile. So there may have been a story here and they may have adapted a story. So there's a question of when this story's origin is. But it does have a connection, it seems like, to the area of Babylon, if nothing else, because it's the Tower of Babel. And like in English, we say to babble is like to talk nonsense. It actually turns out the word means the same thing in Hebrew. They have the same kind of pun of like you babble on and on and on. And so they kind of, you can tell they don't exactly like Babylon. But you then have this whole interesting thread line, not just about the tower and the tower getting destroyed, but of language. Which it's interesting because this is one of the inconsistencies is in the previous genealogy in 10 verse 5, we see that one group is already said to have had their own language, but here we kind of reverse a little bit and it's like everyone spoke the same language. Everyone spoke the same tongue, and we kind of have the origin of why there's many languages. This is their punishment, that instead, if people all speak the same language, they're going to do, God says nothing will be impossible. So God confuses them. And there we have the origin of multiple languages. So how does it work as an origin story?
What do the linguists say?
The linguists say that there has always been many languages, basically.
Well, it's sort of like a just so story, and this is how we got
Right.
multiple languages.
So
And this, the giraffe got its long neck, and this is how.
I mean, we saw that in Noah. This is how we got a rainbow.
Yeah.
Mhm,
Yeah. Mary Ellen, did I see an almost hand there?
mhm,
Oh, I'm just resting my chin. No,
Okay.
wave if I want to get into it.
mhm.
So the language side of it is actually the interpretation that I really like. Oh, so like one of the more like classic Sunday school interpretations is, I'm sure you all know, is that the people are arrogant and God was teaching them a lesson.
Okay.
We know that one. The one that I am partial to is having this as not a source of punishment, but a source of wisdom. So this is likely a modern interpretation and not an ancient interpretation. I actually forget where I first heard this one, but I really like it, because the thought is that if we all speak the same language, we all are saying the same things, and we all think the same ways because we think in the same patterns. And the problem being that if you all have an idea and everyone's thinking the same way, there's no one to challenge you when you have a bad idea.
Hmm.
And that instead of it being like a curse, it's actually a blessing that so many different languages exist, because I mean, there's list upon list on the internet of like, this language has a word that English doesn't have, and English steals words from languages all the time. But there's also the problem of translation that there are just sometimes you cannot translate between languages, because languages come with a whole worldview and the ability to say things in a certain way that sometimes other languages have no way of replicating. But basically, the differences in language actually make us wiser, because we can see and observe different things, because language literally guides the way we think. And so this is actually one of the things of like, instead of God being like, oh, you arrogant humans, more like, oh, you didn't see the flaw in your system. Let's give you some more language, and maybe you can work out some different points of view to fix this, because this was not a good idea.
You know, I'm seeing a comparison with what you just said to my experience with the Orthodox thinking, the extreme conservative Presbyterian group, and they didn't want any diversity, anything that was out of their, like, you know, there was a time when there was a couple who came to the church. They were not married, but they were living together. They were asked to leave. I've never heard of church asking people to leave because they lived a different lifestyle. And, you know, so what you're saying is diversity enriches us. And they're saying diversity contaminates us. And, you know, that both ways of thinking exist today. So just a thought.
Yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts on many languages being a gift instead of a curse?
Well, we all speak English, but we sure don't all have the same ideas.
I mean, that's also true. Oh, I mean, so Logan's major is in, wait, is it his major? No, it's his minor. His minor was in English, but he took some very technical classes on it. In one of them, he actually learned to read and speak Old English, which is just baffling to me because it sounds so different. And the one thing, like, if I ever want to get him going, all I have to do is like put a thing out there that basically says, this person says that English has to be this way, and he'll go on a long rant about how language is fluid and that there is no technically one correct way because we just see how language constantly evolves. And so the rules evolve, and like, it almost seems like the key thing is agreeing upon something that makes sense, like language being a tool for like communication. But it is interesting seeing some, like the other rants that I also see of like, don't people know that English is supposed to be this way, and we have this rule, and the Oxford English Dictionary in 1955 said this, and that is the rule for all time, and kind of that like stamping down of like, this is the way you do it properly. And the other argument being like, well, it's always changed. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because like times change and we need new language to tackle new problems. Like if we never had new words to add for like about computer stuff, we would be absolutely lost.
I'm still lost in computer language. But
Right.
I was thinking we have so many dialects in English, and some of them we can hardly understand. For instance, the Black culture has a dialect that sometimes is really kind of hard to understand. And they have different words and different ways of saying the same words. So it's just, yeah, fluid is right.
Well, see, there's that one. But you go to Northern Ireland, I can actually understand like the Black American English dialect. That one I can understand more than like a rural Northern Irish person. I just like I don't understand how that's the same language I speak.
Yeah.
Well, in Ireland, the further away you get from Dublin, it's harder to understand the country people. They're just, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, it's kind of amazing. All right, with a little bit more than 10 minutes to go, do we want to discuss a little bit of transitioning out of this age of mythology and going and how we're going to tackle this next section?
Yeah.
So do we feel like we have a hold on the Tower of Babel, our kind of last mythological story? Okay. So from here, we have our second set of genealogy. You will find that some of the genealogy in chapter 10 and at the end of chapter 11, there's a lot of overlap here. And Sue, I believe you're the one who pointed out that, yeah, there's like reasonable ages where they're like, when they have their children, like 35 years, that's not bad for having a kid. But all of a sudden we're back to having like 300-year-old men, which evidently formerly God limited humans' years to 120. So
yeah.
Don't know why we're back to this, but evidently this is where you see kind of the inconsistency and blending in stories of it is because it is. But all of this, this goes straight from Noah, 10 generations, and then we hit a name we definitely know, which is Abram. So Abram is a name that means the father is exalted. So he's given this kind of grandiose name, even when it's in the short version. So I take it you all know Abram, right? All right, so what we get, so we have all the genealogy, we got the next generations, and then in 27, we get this like transitional little section where we have Terah, who is the father of Abram, and Nahor, and Haran. So Abram is one of three. I believe he is the oldest. And then this is where we get Terah is the one who actually sets out from the land of Ur. Let me see if I can get a map real quick. So you can see where they're starting out. So it is not actually originally Abram that sets out, but it's his father, and they're taking Lot with them. Okay, here we go.
Oh, and it's in Iraq.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So if you see, this map is good because you have the Euphrates River and you have the Tigris River. Babylon, I believe, is somewhere like more over here, but yeah, it's like at the border of Iraq and Iran. So it's pretty far away. And the journey that we're about to see is they're gonna follow the river up and then mostly down, because in between here is just pure desert and there's not really any water. So this is not really where we think of the Hebrew people being, right? We think of them more over here. We're in this little stretch of land, but their patriarch, the start of the story is way over in the east. So that's where we're gonna start. Terah is gonna be the one to start off the journey. We're not really given an explanation of why they're leaving the Chaldean people, but they have wives. They're gonna start off. And here we have the next stage of our story, and it ends with Terah being 205 years old. Terah dies, and now Abram's the patriarch of the family, already in transit. So what do we think about, or kind of looking backwards of, we are now jumping into chapter 12, so 11 chapters into Genesis, and most of this up until this point has either been genealogy or like mythological origins of things. What are some like commonalities, some things you notice about all of that together, leading up to our main guy, Abram, that's going to take us through the next chunk of Genesis? What do you all think of what we've talked about for the past few weeks?
well, it's a long way from the Garden of Eden to Abram. And, I guess, what those stories, I mean, they're the bridge between the creation and the beginning of the Hebrew people.
Yeah,
And it's a nice story.
it's about how it got from there to there.
Right. Yeah. If we're gonna start at creation, we need some way to get to like established society.
Yeah,
And what the thing that gets me, what's the time frame? Like you say, a day in God term is 1,000 years. Well,
we don't know, do we? The time.
no, I don't think we've got any.
So this is where there is some people who really love numbers that went through the genealogies and did the math to like figure out, I mean, because we have how old most of these people are, that there are people who think they have the date for the like creation of the universe. If you believe all of this is literal, if you trust all the dates, if you trust all the ages, they have done the calculations. If you know the book or television series Good Omens, there is a joke about it in the first episode in the beginning of the book, because people have done the calculations. If you go to the Creation Museum, they will tell you the hour of the day that the world was created.
Wow.
Which feels like you're missing the point, in my opinion. But because we have all these numbers and ages, theoretically we could do it. If you just stack them up next to each other and see how old people were when they had their sons, you can calculate backwards. But what we know for sure is that even if you trust the Bible and that these people are living to like 300 years old and you back it up, it actually doesn't back up that far. It doesn't even get us into the Ice Age. It doesn't get us to the pyramids. The world of the Bible is far younger than we know even society is. We have archaeological evidence that is older than the dates in here.
Mhm. Mhm.
Did people count accurately in those days? It seems to me I've heard that they really weren't very good at counting. And I don't think that I would, if that's true, I don't think I would trust those ages.
More than anything, I have an underlying assumption that goes with how I look at things in the past. And my assumption is people are more or less a similar level of intelligence that we are today. It is my faith in humanity that like we look back and we see very creative, crafty people. We see the same amount of dumb decisions. I don't think we are that much smarter. I just think we have more high-tech technology that makes us feel smarter.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of knowledge we have lost. And so in some ways, we're actually dumber than some of our ancestors. And like, we don't retain some of that information. But why I bring this up is if we like counting, I'm going to assume they liked doing it too. If we like knowing how old we are, I think they're going to find a way to do it. And I don't know how they would do it, but my assumption is people like that. And so I don't think that's really changed. The thing is, we don't know how they counted. And that is the difference. We're just random like rabbit bunny trail that I went down the other day is like figuring out why does February have such a different number of days than any other month on our calendar, and it would be better if we just equalized them. Turns out the history of it is that March, the season of March, in the Roman tradition had no fixed date on it. March was just the time before spring happened, and it could be 30 days, and depending on the season, sometimes it was 45, but April happened when the season changed. And so that's why some of those dates are kind of weird, is just because of a Roman tradition that they counted time differently. So we don't know how they counted time, so we can't, I don't trust their ages just because we don't know the metric they're going by. I don't think they thought they were living to 300 years in our time and how we measure time.
That's pretty hard to believe. But I mean, they lived a long time. I mean, they were old, but as far as the accurate number, I don't think that was meant.
Right. So
as we would understand.
But they're what gives me pause is they are precise enough for me to give them weight. The fact that they are not 300 years, but 309 years makes me think that's just not a number someone chooses out of a hat. So there's something here. I just don't think we understand it.
Right. Well, I'm sorry to have to leave early. This is so interesting, but I have a responsibility.
All right. Well, take care.
And why this obsession to write down all these numbers? I mean, there are so many, if they mentioned, oh, Abraham was an old man when he died, but when they write down 311 years, and it was, why this precision about something?
I would say, the only answer I could give is look at our own society and where we like keeping oddly precise numbers.
Right. Yeah, I know it. Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't know. But yeah, they liked memorizing numbers. They really did. So any other concluding thoughts to the beginning mythology of Genesis?
Well, my only thought is that they had to do all this genealogy so that it could all narrow down finally to Abram.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They had to know what the world was like and then have the genealogies from Adam and Eve.
Mhm.
And there's genealogies all through, aren't there? So we are linking people all the way along.
Yeah, yeah. Because so part of this also may deal with ideas of hospitality, because family means everything. And if you're a traveler, you rely on people. Like our idea of a hotel doesn't really exist. You would rely on the hospitality of strangers. But if you have a genealogy and you have a common ancestor, that means your family, which means you have an obligation then. And we see this with Joseph and Jesus' story. So there is family dynamics going here too. Who is in the in group, who is in the out group, and memorizing that makes some relationships easier when you have bigger gatherings. There is anthropology done about this in the indigenous North American communities, that a lot of the native populations here had a similar thing where they had an identity as a like larger group for like tribal gatherings, but they lived in much smaller groups, and you needed to know the genealogy basically to know which like big people group you belonged in. But it also deals with who can you marry in a let's say in a way that will not have bad offspring. And so because you like, if you don't have a birth certificate and you don't have a family tree, you need to memorize your family tree so you're not inbreeding too much, basically. So there are functions to it. I don't know about keeping track of the ages, but knowing who your family is important for societal reasons.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Right.
I'm gonna go.
Hmm?
I have to go, so I'm
Okay.
gonna sleep. All right.
all right.
No Bible study next week, right?
Is next week's no, there is next week because it's the 31st. It's the week after that we won't be there. Or I won't.
All right, all right. See you all.
All right, take care. All right. So I'll put it in the notes, but for next time, we are going to just do chapter 12.
Chapter 12.
Oh, I've already read that.
Yeah. We're gonna start, this begins some of the juicy gossip section, because this is all family drama for the next long time. It's all
Yes.
drama all the time, and we get to talk about family systems.
Now,
Because Abraham and Sarah are weird. So, all right. Well, can I pray us out for today?
mhm.
All right.
Chris, can I ask you a quick question that doesn't have anything to do with this?
What's up?
But I just wanted to be checked on when the next session meeting is going to be. We talked about having a quick meeting and just doing basic stuff, and then spending time traveling around and looking at different gardens. Or so what should I put in the minutes about in the next meeting? Should it be the regular time, the first
That would
Thursday?
be,
Yes, because my thought is that's one of the things I'm working on tomorrow, is trying to get in contact with people to visit. If they're
So
not
it's just-
able to, if we're not able to visit on the Thursday of the meeting, what I might do is set them up in advance and just have a discussion on what we found. So we will have at least an abbreviated meeting on that Thursday.
okay,
Okay.
that's the 2nd, correct?
That's good, because my sister will be here.
June 2nd.
It'll be a short meeting. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Okay.
All right. All right. Well, let us do a quick prayer and then we can carry on with our days.
Okay.
So good and gracious God, we marvel at these stories, God, and we don't always know what to do with them, because they come from a community long ago saying something about you. And so we've been trying to figure out what we should know today about how you move through the world, and whether you, like in our story today, show up and walk around and look, and if you have a heavenly host around you. And sometimes, Lord, we wonder if you are that ever-present being who is everywhere all at once. But Lord, help us understand what these stories are trying to say about you, and help it guide us in our lives and how to relate to you and relate to one another. Help us to see both the gifts you have given us, and help us take correction when we're on the wrong track. So we pray all these things in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.
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 All right. Well, I will be seeing
Thank
you all
you.
next week then.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Very good. See you.